Welcome to Rican Wrestling Talk. I'm your host, Luis Rodriguez. As we get more into this podcast, I'll stop introducing myself in hopes that I've garnered enough of an audience. I wanted to start this podcast, which isn't normally what I'm going to be doing. I'm only going to do one podcast a week. But if this catches on, maybe I'll do a second podcast where I just talk about one specific topic instead of delving from storyline into storyline and topic into topic. But I wanted to do something. On my podcast yesterday, I took the time to let you guys know that Bryan Danielson is my favorite wrestler in the world. But it didn't start with Bryan. You see, I'm one of these weird guys who saw a movie a while back called High Fidelity. And when I saw that movie, I loved that the main actor, his name's John Cusack, that his thing for the movie was top five breakup songs, top five women he dated, and so on. And I wanted to apply that to my life. So a lot of the times on my social media, I'll post like my top 5 favorite matches, top 5 favorite athletes. And the one thing that I've always found really hard to do is to give my answer for top 5 favorite wrestlers ever. Now, I do have a Mount Rushmore, my personal Mount Rushmore. And I'm sure you won't agree because we all have different tastes. But I have 4 guys that I consider my Mount Rushmore guys. And I don't look at it as what they mean to professional wrestling. I look at it as what they mean to me. Now, these are my guys. I'm going to give you the list first, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of something from each wrestler. And then at the end, I'll give you my honorable mentions if I were to round it out to a top 5. Maybe I can throw one guy in, but number 5 kind of jumps in and out. It usually changes. So here goes. The 4 guys that mean the most to me in professional wrestling, that have affected me, that have made me a fan, that have made me buy their merchandise, that's made me laugh, cry, shout in anger, or just pure joy, are as followed: Bryan Danielson, Sting, Bret the Hitman Hart, and Brock Lesnar. These are my 4 favorite wrestlers ever. And I know you're thinking to yourself, this is a weird list. You have a super entertainer in Sting. You have 2 phenomenal technicians in Bryan and Bret. And then you have Brock Lesnar, who is just a showcase, who is pay-per-view buys walking. He is just a license to print money. Well, I guess I'll start at the beginning. Back in 1989, my father sat me down to watch wrestling with him. And at the time, I didn't know anything about professional wrestling. I mean, I was 5 years old. How was I supposed to know anything about wrestling? I had watched it, I was earlier, but this was the first time he actually sat me down and he wanted me to watch something. He said, Louie, you gotta watch this. And my dad, with his Jersey Rican accent, he's like, Louie, you gotta check this out. You gotta look at this, Louie. It's amazing. So I remember the first professional wrestling match I ever saw was Sting versus Ric Flair. Now, I have gone back and watched this match on numerous occasions. And I had no idea what it meant to the career of Sting. And I had no idea what it meant to put someone over. Now, here I am, 38 years old, still a fan of professional wrestling. I'm still as diehard as I ever was. But now I know a little bit more. Being that I was able to be in a professional wrestling ring and take bumps, run the ropes, take suplexes, put headlocks on properly, have actual coaching and training, and to see how hard this art form is. I have always appreciated wrestlers more. But what Sting did for me that day, he became my first hero. Now, I know what you're thinking. Your parents are your first heroes. But I didn't live with my dad. I lived in Puerto Rico. My dad lived in New Jersey. So when I came to visit him to the States, he would always try to funnel everything that he did in those 6 months or that year, because sometimes it was a whole year until I saw my dad. And he would funnel it in and try to show me everything he could. When I watched Sting, I remember thinking, oh, this guy's cool. His face is painted. This is awesome. It's like war paint. And to watch him shout, to do his version of the Ric Flair woo. Because that's kind of what I've always thought it was. Ric Flair did the woo, and Ric Flair did the wow. I mean, it was amazing. I was always such a fan, the way he beat his chest, the way he no-sold chops, and how it meant and what Ric Flair did for him that day. That match turned out to be a draw. And a year later, in Baltimore, Maryland, Sting did beat Ric Flair for the World Heavyweight title. And I remember that match too. I watched that pay-per-view with my dad. Well, Sting would go on to have one of the most phenomenal careers in professional wrestling. And he was the guy, the catalyst that made me start looking at other people. See, I didn't know anyone. All I knew is that my dad was a fan of WCW and NWA, and that made me a fan of WCW and NWA. And I have so many great matches of Sting's that I consider my favorite matches ever. There's an opening match segment in which Sting wrestles then WCW heavyweight champion Diamond Dallas Page. And to this day, it is one of, if not my favorite Sting match ever. The way Sting reversed the Diamond Cutter into the Scorpion Death Drop, the way he raised the WCW championship in an opening match, and it was upside down, which I would later find out was kind of something WCW did on purpose. But his face paint was all but gone. It was only around his eyes. He almost looked like Alice Cooper. It was just glorious. It was that feeling you get. I'd imagine the feeling my dad got when Dwight Clark caught the catch from Joe Montana. Or the feeling I got when I thought the New Orleans Saints had come back and beat the Niners in the divisional round a couple years ago, and Alex Smith drove the team down the field only to throw the catch 3 to Vernon Davis. See, I had seen the second catch, which was Steve Young to Terrell Owens, but it didn't really hit me as much as the Alex Smith to Vernon Davis one. I watched Alex get drafted, and I watched that team go from awful to best team in football. It was otherworldly to me. That's what Sting did. He got me to be that guy who jumped up. I was excited. I didn't want him to lose ever. I remember being, oh man, just heartbroken when he lost the title to Vader. I remember when he tore his knee, when the Scorpion, who was later revealed as Ric Flair, had jumped him and Sting had like torn his ACL or popped his kneecap out of place. I just remember being angry and upset, and Sting's always done that for me. He's wrestled some of my favorite wrestlers ever. He's also made me understand what character means. Because his original character that I had seen was the Surfer Sting. Blonde hair, face paint, colorful gear, with his super generic theme song, Man Called Sting. But I was always such a fan. I remember when I watched him as Crow Sting, when he made that transition, I was absolutely hooked. And it meant so much more to me because, see, I have the typical dad who sat down and wanted me to watch these Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, these Bruce Lee movies, These Sylvester Stallone movies like Cobra and Nighthawk. But I remember watching The Crow and thinking, oh my God, Brandon Lee, this is Bruce Lee's son, and he's awesome. So watching Sting adapt his face paint and then turn it into his own, so it's not the same face paint anymore, but it was at one point. It was just, wow, you can take character traits from a movie or a comic book and transfer them into professional wrestling. It was eye-opening for me. Sting mattered more to me than most people resonate with superstars. And I have a buddy of mine, Tyler, who loves Cody Rhodes. And he tells me all the time what Cody means to him, what his father means to him. And every time he tells me that, it reminds me of my attachment to Sting. I will forever be grateful that I got to see Sting in 1989 and I got to watch him wrestle all the way up until his debut in WWE at Survivor Series, and to actually see him come out at WrestleMania. For me, it was biblical. I can't use a better word. I felt like it was meant to happen, like it was the plan all along. Well, from Sting, I have to segue into the guy who made me cry at professional wrestling the first time. I became a fan of Bret the Hitman Hart early. As soon as I started delving in and looking at other wrestlers, am I a Mr. Perfect fan? Am I a Rick Rude fan? Do I like Lex Luger? Yeah, those are guys that I thought were cool. But Bret Hart, this guy made Pink awesome. I mean, the Pink and Black Attack, the Hart Foundation. And to watch him take bumps, to watch him do a move as simple as the vertical suplex, and to make it look better than it's ever looked before. To this day, it's one of the moves that when Bret Hart did it, it looked gut-wrenching. I mean, it just looks so good, but no one does it the way he did. I haven't seen one person give a vertical suplex the way Bret Hart did. I remember watching him win the King of the Ring and being so excited. Because believe it or not, I didn't grow up just a babyface fan. I love the bad guys as well. Sting is the only man on this list who has the shortest time as a heel. But Bret Hart wrestling Bam Bam Bigelow, and I liked Bam Bam. I thought it was one of the best matches I'd ever seen. It was my true first look at a David versus Goliath match. To see Bret hold his own against a guy like Bam Bam Bigelow was phenomenal. I mean, I've watched him work Mr. Perfect, and I was like, yeah, they're about the same size. And this works. But seeing him work Bam Bam, I was like, this guy can do anything. I mean, the way he took the turnbuckle bump, the way he took a back bump, and it wasn't like anyone else. If you go back and watch old Bret videos, he did this thing where it was almost like he did it so grueling that it hurt him so bad. I remember it was almost like someone had just gotten a seizure and they fall back and they're stiff. The way Bret took a back bump, his fists were up in the air. He never slapped the mat the way they traditionally teach you. He turned everything into professional wrestling into a Bret Hart version. His backbreaker, his Russian leg sweep, his sharpshooter, which is still the best version of that move that we will ever see. We've seen so many people do it. We've seen Sting do it with the Scorpion Deathlock. Early in his career, it looked very good. Towards the end, not so much. He falls a lot while doing it now. Cesaro, Tyson Kidd, Chris Benoit. We've seen all of these guys do this move. But no one does it like Bret. And I have always been a fan of Bret. He's emotionally brought things out of me that I didn't even know I had towards professional wrestling. When I watched him lose the WWF Championship to Yokozuna at WrestleMania 9, I cried. I absolutely cried. Just like that CM Punk guy when CM Punk came back to wrestling. Just like the little Miz girl when Miz beat Randy Orton for the Money in the Bank, when he cashed in the Money in the Bank. I was that child. I was that person that was heartbroken. And in that moment is when I started hating Hulk Hogan. Yes, I will go into a podcast one day where I talk about my true feelings of Hogan without needing to talk about the disgrace of a human being he is. Well, from Bret Hart, I have to go into Brock Lesnar. See, Brock Lesnar was one of these guys that I liked the moment I saw him. He was just so I don't know how to describe it. He was so hard to not look at. I mean, he was huge. And to know he was an NCAA champion, to know he transitioned into professional wrestling the way he did. It absolutely left me dumbfounded. I've always liked Brock Lesnar. I remember the first time I saw him live. Unfortunately, he lost the undisputed championship to the Big Show. And I remember thinking, damn it, why? Am I a jinx to this guy? Is he never going to win the championship again? Now, clearly I was wrong. He won it 6 more times. But he's always been one of my favorite guys. And I remember being so heartbroken to know that he left professional wrestling. You see, the next time I watched him live was at WrestleMania 20, when I watched him lose to Bill Goldberg. I'm not your typical fan. I'm not a fan of guys like Bill Goldberg. I didn't just like people because they were big. Brock Lesnar was unique. And as you can see from my list, he's unique. There's no one on this list, even in the honorable mentions that I'm going to talk about, that is anything like him. So when he came back to professional wrestling, I was ecstatic. I used to have conversations with my friends on the phone where I would say, if Brock Lesnar cared enough about professional wrestling as much as he did to making a huge name for himself and leaving for the NFL and becoming an MMA champion, if he would have just stayed in professional wrestling, and I mean this wholeheartedly, I think he rivals Shawn Michaels as the greatest of all time. Because he had something that no one else had. And I've watched it over and over. The way he's been able to work big guys and give us great matches. Guys similar to his size, like The Undertaker, and give us amazing matches like the No Mercy Hell in the Cell. Or his Survivor Series matches against AJ Styles, against Bryan Danielson, his match with Finn Balor. Everything he did, in my opinion, was gold. There was nothing he did wrong. When I watched him beat John Cena at SummerSlam in the most convincing fashion we've ever seen in professional wrestling. I mean, yes, we've seen more dominant wins. Examples such as Diesel powerbombing Bob Backlund, Sheamus beating Daniel Bryan. But we hadn't seen somebody take the face of the company and just completely roll through him the way Brock did. It was one of the best moments in professional wrestling I think we'll ever get. And the thing about Brock is that he has no problem putting people over because he loses the next encounter to John Cena. And that's what makes him so special. He can work a guy, get everything he can, but he has no problem giving a receipt. And no, I don't believe that a receipt in professional wrestling is just, you hit me hard during the match, so I'm going to get you back. Sometimes a receipt, to me, can come in the form of a loss. And that's what Brock did. He gave Cena his receipt. He did the same with Triple H.
He's done this with Bill Goldberg most recently. I mean, I'm sure you guys have access to the internet, so I'm sure you'll be able to look it up. But the whole feud with Bill Goldberg that led to their Universal title match at WrestleMania was Lesnar's idea. He knew that Goldberg had to beat him convincingly. He knew Goldberg had to eliminate him from the Rumble the way he did. It mattered. So that way the Mania match made more sense when he threw Goldberg around. Brock Lesnar, to me, is one of those guys that I wish would not have taken the time off. Because not everybody can take the time off the way Shawn Michaels did. Shawn left from injury and obviously more personal reasons. But when Shawn came back, I would argue with anyone, his second run was way better than his first run. He had better matches. He had better segments, better promos, and better feuds. And now on to my current favorite wrestler, the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson. I don't know what it is about Bryan, but as I said yesterday, from the first moment I saw Bryan in Charity Hall, I was hooked, man. And I didn't mention this in the podcast yesterday, but I will today. Another tape that I was lucky enough to watch was the Super 8 tournament. It was held by a promotion that was known as ECWA, and they ran this tournament every year. It was the Super 8 tournament. Now, Bryan did not win this tournament. This one he loses in the finals to Low Ki. But there's one match that stole the entire card. The opening match is Bryan Danielson versus Brian Kendrick, then known as Spanky. To this day, whenever somebody asks me to best sum up Bryan Danielson, I tell them to go watch that match with Spanky. I say it's not hard to find. YouTube has the match in its entirety. And if you think you're not watching the right match, because they have multiple matches together because they both train together, for some odd reason, Bryan was wearing pink sweatpants in this match. And to me, Bryan has always been that guy. I mean, I absolutely hated the start of his run in WWE. I hated how he was used as this jobber, and he lost every single match he had at NXT. And then he got eliminated, only to come back with Nexus and then be fired, only to come back at SummerSlam and not really be given anything until his feud with Miz, then be a throwaway United States champion. You can hear the passion in my voice because I feel like he was kind of overlooked for a long time. To me, he was the best wrestler on the planet. To this day, I feel like he's the best wrestler on the planet. And I think that's kind of funny since he called himself the Planet's champion. But I've always felt that way. I remember dropping to my knees in my living room at my apartment and crying when he beat John Cena for the WWE Championship in the main event at SummerSlam. I remember being equally angry. I mean, not Dallas Cowboys angry, like punching my television and freaking out and tearing up my house or nothing. But I remember being equally as angry when Randy Orton beat him for the title. And for some reason, even though I knew he wasn't going to be a long-time champion, when he beat Randy Orton for the title a couple pay-per-views down the road, I remember being equally as happy to being able to watch him tear the house down. In my opinion, the greatest opening match in WrestleMania history, Bryan Danielson, then known as Daniel Bryan versus Triple H. These two put on a clinic for 30 minutes. It was, oh my God, it was otherworldly to me. For those of you that don't think Triple H is a good worker, you really need to delve into his work. You got to go into his past. Because Triple H has always been a phenomenal wrestler. But Bryan, to me, can work a broomstick. I mean, we've seen these funny matches where, like, Kenny Omega works a blow-up doll, and he gets a good match out of it. Well, Bryan can do that. Bryan, I've always felt, was that guy. And he has this ability to get the crowd behind him. I mean, he was a champion for 6 months. He was a WWE champion for 6 months as a heel. And, oh my God, you can hear the crowd. They're cheering for him and they're supposed to boo him because he's so good in the ring. And I love how he, again, I use the term, gave a receipt. He pushed for the match with Kofi. He knew what he was watching. It was reminiscent of his WrestleMania 30 run. It was reminiscent of Yeselmania, the aforementioned Kofi Mania. And that's what I love about Bryan. Every interview he's ever been on, Stone Cold's podcast, Jericho's podcast, or any YouTube video that you could find of his interview, he's always talked about giving back to professional wrestling and what not being a champion wasn't a big deal to him. How he wanted to raise the next level of superstars. To watch him do this recently in AEW with guys like Sammy Guevara. To watch him do it with Daniel Garcia. I mean, to me, there's no better wrestler than Bryan Danielson. He is one of the best in-ring performers ever. But as a total package, in my opinion, he's the best to ever do it. And I absolutely believe that. I know a lot of people say that their GOAT is Shawn Michaels. I like to say, my GOAT is Bryan Danielson, and guess what, guys? Your GOAT trained him. Because that's what people don't know. Shawn Michaels trained him. He was also trained by William Regal. But what Bryan, I felt like, was able to do with the crowd, and how he was able to improve weekly. I mean, I honestly don't know if he did mirror promos or if he did acting class, but I always felt like he had this charisma that fans loved. He took a throwaway tag team like Team Hell No, and they became the best thing on Raw and SmackDown. I mean, I am the tag team champion. No, I am the tag team champion. I mean, honestly, everything that Bryan was given, he made gold. He made perfection. His feud with The Miz. I mean, Bryan's been the one guy that can lose a feud to a guy like The Miz. Him and his wife can wrestle The Miz and Maurice at a pay-per-view and lose and still come out the winner. I'll talk about that some other time, how sometimes losing a match doesn't necessarily mean that you lose your place in the card. Sometimes it's all about giving to the next guy. And that's what Bryan's been able to do. So to me, he has such an encyclopedia of matches that I absolutely love. He is one of the best superstars we're ever going to see. And I love the fact that he's still working at a high level. It honestly, it is reminiscent of Shawn Michaels because he had to retire for a couple of years. And he came back, and his matches now seem to be better than the original matches he had at WWE. It's spectacular. Now, I've argued with my buddy Tyler about this a lot. He feels like Bryan didn't need to be added to the WrestleMania main event with Edge and Roman. And you know what? I'll concede he might have been right. But in my opinion, I thought the tagline was suited for the three of them. Roman Reigns had cancer. He had to quit professional wrestling for a little bit. Edge had a neck injury. He had to quit for a decade. And Bryan had his career cut short as well. And they all got to come back and main event WrestleMania together. To me, that match is one of the best main events we've ever seen at WrestleMania, but it's also one of the most emotional matches I've ever seen. Because I do love Roman Reigns. And I feel like when it's all said and done, the way I feel about Roman, he probably will be my number 5 favorite wrestler all time. But it's still too soon to tell. Now, as I said, I'm going to give you some honorable mentions. So here goes. There are guys that I like that other people don't like. But some of you might agree. Clearly, I just mentioned one, Roman Reigns. I wasn't a fan of his originally. I just didn't get it. I felt like they were trying to give us the agenda of he's the next Rock, he's the next Cena, and I don't know. To me, being great in the ring without at least being able to cut some sort of a promo, it just really bothered me. But to watch him work AJ Styles, to watch him work Bryan Danielson, and his matches with Randy Orton that are never talked about for some weird reason, to watch his match with Dean Ambrose, or his couple of matches with Seth Rollins, I think he will go down as one of the Mount Rushmore superstars all time. And eventually, I do believe he will knock people off Mount Rushmore, guys like Hogan. Another guy that I loved very much growing up was Booker T. I really can't explain to you my love for Booker T. I always liked him in Harlem Heat. I think what I really loved was his Best of 7 series with Chris Benoit. Now, I know I'm not supposed to really talk about that guy, so I won't give him a lot of time. But him and Booker had this unbelievable chemistry. And I challenge everyone to go back into WCW's archive and watch those Best of 7 matches. There isn't a single stinker. All 7 were phenomenal. And believe it or not, they had another Best of series in WWE. I'm pretty sure Booker won them both. And he should have, because he was a bigger star. To be honest with you, he was a bigger star. I've always liked him. Another guy that was a big deal for me was Eddie Guerrero. I absolutely loved Eddie Guerrero. It was something about him being Latino. And I didn't really have guys to root for that were like me. I mean, yeah, there was Carlito Colon. And when I lived in Puerto Rico, there was guys like Huracan Castillo or Carlos Colon, Carlito's dad. But there wasn't very many guys. I mean, yeah, you can say Savio Vega, but I just wasn't a fan. There was something about him that I didn't really dig. Eddie Guerrero gave me everything I wanted. He gave me the best in-ring performer at the time of him wrestling. He gave me the most emotional promos. He gave me the best heat. I mean, Eddie had this Owen Hart ability. And what I mean by that is Owen Hart played to the crowd better than anybody we've ever seen. And the only person that comes close to him in this regard is Eddie Guerrero. See, Owen was able to work a match, whether it was at a house show or a paid live event or a pay-per-view, where he can hear the crowd kind of go silent, and he would, for no reason at all, hit a move, hit a rest spot in the match, and then turn to the crowd and scream, "I'm not a nugget." And that's the type of thing that Eddie did. He was able to work the entire match, and the moment he had people being a little bit too quiet for his liking, he was able to get them to give him massive heat. "I'm your papi," or, chanting for Vicky, or the way he screwed over Batista. I mean, it was just such amazing theater coming from a guy who should have never been in the spot he was in, but once he was given that opportunity, oh man, did he make Latinos everywhere proud. I mean, it is beautiful to know that people like Peyton Royce or Cassie Lee, I believe that's the same person, I'm sorry. I believe that's just her real name. Or Billie Kay, I should say. Or Sasha Banks. Now, Sasha's one of the biggest female superstars ever. And she says her favorite wrestler ever is Eddie Guerrero. She still goes back and watches his matches. Honestly, I love that. I love that people still talk about Eddie. He'll never go away because his in-ring work was timeless. Now, this one's kind of emotional for me. I should say that I moved in with my dad full-time in 1997. And That means that I left my island, I left my home, and moved to New Jersey to live with my father. And when I did that, my dad was so happy that I was living with him, and he knew he had his little wrestling buddy back. Now, I was 13 years old at this time, but, I wanted my dad to do things with me. And my dad knew that professional wrestling was life. I mean, he used to send me magazines to Puerto Rico. I mean, he used to send me tapes, all types of stuff. Any wrestling video game that was out, he would send me so I had it. He knew what wrestling meant to me. And one of my dad's favorite wrestlers was, before he became a household name, was Rocky Maivia. Now, obviously, you know who that turns into. He turns into The Rock. And I don't say that lightly, because The Rock is one of the greatest superstars of all time. And honestly, if I didn't have so many people in my honorable mention, Rocky would be in my Mount Rushmore. But I just don't know who to take off for him. But to me, Rock is one of those guys who's just absolutely never given me a bad match. I love everything he does. And he was the best promo of his era. Even when he came back, having promos against CM Punk, they were amazing promos. His promos against John Cena, I felt like he ate John Cena up. I don't even know what promo anybody feels like John Cena won. Even when Rock goes shoot and reminds him that if you strip everything away, he's still a big-ass Samoan who can beat his ass. I for some reason thought that was a part of the actual feud. And I remember thinking, this is great. I later come to find out that Cena said something in the ring that pissed off Rock, and Rock had, he lost his temper, and he kind of jumped out of character for a little bit. But to me, Rocky was one of those guys that I loved, and my dad loved him, so we rooted for him together. Well, clearly there's other guys on the list that I'm sure that people will be annoyed I don't mention, like Seth Rollins or CM Punk. I love Punk. I love Seth Rollins. But this is my personal Mount Rushmore. So I just wanted to remind you who they are. Sting, Bryan Danielson, Bret the Hitman Hart, and Brock Lesnar. To me, those four guys are the reason that I watch professional wrestling. And I love everything they do. And I will argue with anyone. Bret was screwed in Montreal. I don't care who you are. Absolutely not. I'll fight that tooth and nail. Anyway, thanks for listening. This has been Rican Wrestling Talk with your host, Luis Rodriguez, and you can find me on TikTok under BORICUA.LOU. Thanks again for listening. I'm out.